Subscribe to Echo Tales for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. The house was too quiet now. Eliza stood by the kitchen window, staring at the garden where laughter used to live. The wind stirred the rose bushes Mark had planted, but all she could feel was silence. He had been gone for 8 months, and somehow she still caught herself setting the table for 2. Grief had become her routine. Morning coffee for 1. Watering the garden he loved. Folding shirts he'd never wear again. She was only 39, but it felt like her life had been paused, like she was living in a memory that refused to let go. She didn't expect visitors, especially not that day. When the doorbell rang, her heart skipped, not out of excitement, but out of confusion. Nobody came by anymore. Not since the funeral. She opened the door and froze. There he was, Jacob, her stepson, Mark's only child from his first marriage. They had barely spoken beyond awkward greetings at the wedding, and a few brief words after Mark's passing. Jacob had always been distant, especially from his father, a boy with walls around his heart. He was 22 now, taller than she remembered, wearing a worn leather jacket and carrying a tired backpack. "Eliza," he said, voice soft but uncertain. "Hi." "Jacob." He shifted his weight. "I'm sorry for showing up like this. I needed somewhere to go. Just for a while. Can I stay?" Eliza blinked. The last time she saw him, he had barely met her eyes. Now he was standing at her door, vulnerable, almost lost. The rain started then, light but steady. It traced down the side of his face like tears. Without thinking, she stepped aside. "Come in." The moment he walked through the door, it was like the past and the present collided. She saw traces of Mark in his jawline, his eyes, even the way he glanced around the living room. But Jacob wasn't Mark. He was his own storm. They didn't talk much that night. Eliza made soup. He offered to help, then sat in the corner silently, spooning broth like he hadn't eaten in days. The air between them was thick with unspoken things. He told her he'd left school, that he had nowhere else to go, that he didn't know what was next. Eliza listened, not as a mother, not even as a friend, just as a woman who understood what it felt like to be broken and drifting. When he thanked her for the meal, she simply nodded. "You can stay in the guest room for as long as you need." That night, lying in her empty bed, she stared at the ceiling. She hadn't heard another voice in the house in months. And now, there was a young man upstairs, asleep under her roof, someone who reminded her of the love she lost, but also of the life that hadn't ended yet. She didn't know what to expect from tomorrow, or the next day. But she felt something shift. Not quite hope, not quite fear, just the beginning of something unexpected. Jacob moved into the upstairs guest room, and just like that, Eliza's world shifted. The house no longer echoed with just memories. It held the quiet weight of 2 people learning how to breathe again. At first, everything was wrapped in silence. Meals were quiet. Mornings even quieter. He woke early, slipped out for walks, and returned with stories he never shared. Eliza, used to solitude, found herself listening for the sound of his footsteps, his door closing, the occasional creak in the hallway. She couldn't tell if it was comfort or confusion she felt. They barely knew each other, but loss had a strange way of building invisible bridges between hearts that would have otherwise stayed apart. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man navigating a life cracked open, just like hers. One evening, after doing laundry, Eliza paused in the hallway. Jacob was standing by the console table, staring at a photograph, an old one of her and Mark, taken during a lazy summer afternoon. They were laughing, arms tangled, sun in their eyes, the kind of love that looked effortless. Jacob didn't turn when he spoke. "He really loved you," he said quietly. His voice was steady, but something was trembling beneath it. "I never got to see that side of him. Not with me." Eliza stepped closer, uncertain whether to comfort or confess. "Mark struggled to show affection, especially with you," she said softly. "But he wanted to. He just didn't know how." Jacob nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I always knew that. I just didn't want it to be true." Their eyes met for the first time in days. Really met. Not as strangers bound by marriage and loss, but as two people carrying the same ache, the same questions. That night, Jacob helped her with the dishes. It was a small thing, but it mattered. The next day, he joined her in the garden without asking. He knelt beside her, pulling weeds and planting new bulbs like he'd been doing it for years. The silence between them began to soften. He told her about music, his passion, how he played piano at night when he couldn't sleep, how Mark never really paid attention. Eliza listened, truly listened, and when she spoke, it wasn't to fix anything. It was simply to be there. They began having dinner together more often, sometimes laughing, sometimes just eating quietly. But something had changed. It was in the way Jacob lingered in the kitchen after clearing his plate, in the way Eliza found herself waiting for him to come downstairs in the morning. There was no plan, no intention, just a quiet rhythm building between them. Familiar, strange, comforting. And every now and then, when Jacob smiled, Eliza saw more than Mark's son. She saw someone becoming part of her present, not just her, past. But there was an edge to it all, a silent question neither dared ask. What was growing between them? Was it connection born from grief, or something deeper? Something neither of them had expected to feel, or wanted to admit. For now, they didn't put it into words. Instead, they passed each other in the hallway with soft glances. They shared music in the living room, sometimes with words, sometimes without. And every time their fingers brushed, over a cup, a doorknob, a garden tool, Eliza felt the tiniest spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. She was alive. Not whole, not healed, but alive. And that, she realized, was the beginning of everything. The days slipped into each other like pages in a book neither of them wanted to finish. Eliza had grown used to Jacob's quiet presence in the house. His footsteps coming down the stairs at dawn, the sound of soft piano notes drifting from the living room at night. They rarely spoke about the past anymore. Instead, they talked about music, about life, about the strange way time could heal and wound all at once. In those late evening moments, when the sky turned lavender and the garden glowed in the dim light, something unspoken stirred between them. They weren't mother and son. They weren't quite friends. They were something in between, something unnamed but growing bolder each day. Then, one evening, the air changed. Eliza was kneeling by the rose bush, fingers deep in soil, when Jacob came outside. She didn't look up, but she could feel him standing there. His presence was heavier than usual, like he was carrying something he couldn't hold alone. "Eliza," he said, his voice rough, uncertain. "Can I ask you something strange?" She wiped her hands on her jeans and turned to face him, eyebrows raised, curious but calm. "Of course." He hesitated, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the sky like he was trying to find the right words written in the clouds. "I've been offered something. A place at a conservatory in Vienna. Full scholarship. It's everything I ever wanted. But..." He exhaled, shaking his head. "I don't know if I can do it." "Not alone." Eliza blinked, caught off guard. "Jacob, that's amazing. Why wouldn't you go?" "I've never had anyone believe in me like you do," he said, eyes suddenly sharp and sincere. "Not even Dad. And now you're the only person who makes me feel seen. Like I can actually do this." She opened her mouth, but he spoke. Again, before she could say a word. "I'm not asking for forever. Just... would you come with me? Just for a while. Help me settle. Be there until I find my feet." He looked at her then. Really looked. "I don't know what it means. I just know I want you there." Eliza's breath caught. She hadn't expected this request, this moment, this vulnerability. The young man standing before her wasn't the lost boy who arrived at her doorstep weeks ago. He was becoming someone else, stronger, surer, yet still reaching for something beyond himself. And in that reach, he was reaching for her. She didn't answer right away. Her heart was thudding, confused, conflicted. She wasn't his mother, but she had grown to care for him in a way that felt deeper than labels. Was it wrong to feel needed like this? Was it selfish to want to go? To feel alive again, not just through him, but beside him? Jacob took a step back, mistaking her silence. "Forget it. That was stupid. I'm sorry." "No," she said quickly, almost breathless. "It's not stupid." He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes like a match about to catch fire. "I just need time to think," she added softly. That night, Eliza sat on her bed, the suitcase in the corner untouched since Mark's passing. She ran her hand across its surface and whispered to the dark, "What would you think, Mark?" But no answer came. Only the memory of a love that had ended, and the beginning of something she hadn't expected. By morning, her decision still hovered like a whisper on her lips. But somewhere deep inside, she already knew she was going to say yes. Eliza didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of Jacob's piano. Soft, aching, like a question wrapped in melody. Her thoughts spun in circles. What was she to him? A connection to his father? A friend? A temptation neither of them dared to name? She had said she needed time to think, but the truth was, her heart had already made the decision. Still, guilt clung to her like a second skin. Mark's face haunted the silence, his laughter, his touch, the life they had built. How could she even consider stepping into something new, something uncertain, with his son? It felt impossible. And yet, Something in her stirred every time Jacob looked at her, like she wasn't just someone from his past, but a possibility in his present. The next morning she made coffee but couldn't drink it. Jacob came downstairs, careful, quiet, almost afraid to meet her eyes. She could feel the weight of his unspoken hopes. "I'll come with you," she said suddenly, setting the mug down. "Just for a while." His head snapped up. "Really?" She nodded. "But only as your friend. I think we both need to keep things simple." A smile broke across his face, relief and something deeper flickering behind his eyes. "I'll take simple," he said, "as long as it's with you." Vienna was like a painting come to life. Cobblestone streets, golden rooftops, and the river winding through the city like a thread of music. They shared a modest apartment not far from the conservatory. It was small, sunlit, filled with unfamiliar warmth. Jacob practiced for hours, fingers dancing over keys with purpose. Eliza spent her days writing, exploring, and rediscovering who she was outside of widowhood. At night, they talked on the balcony about music, grief, fear, and the strange way they found comfort in each other. Days turned into weeks, their simple arrangement blurred at the edges. He brought her coffee in the mornings. She left notes in his piano books. Their hands brushed too often. Their glances lingered too long. Then, after one of his performances, his first major recital, everything cracked open. He had played beautifully, pouring every part of himself into the music. Eliza had watched from the crowd, her chest tight with something that wasn't just pride. After the applause faded, they walked back in silence, the night cool and filled with electricity. On the balcony, he turned to her. "I don't know when it happened," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "But I stopped thinking of you as just my stepmother." Her heart pounded. He took a breath. "I know how it sounds. I know the world wouldn't understand. But you've become the person I trust most, the one I think of when something good happens, or when I'm afraid. I don't want to hide that." Eliza's throat tightened. Part of her wanted to run. Another part wanted to reach for him, just once, to feel something alive again. "Jacob," she said, her voice trembling. This isn't simple anymore." He nodded. "I know, but I don't want to pretend. Even if nothing happens. Even if you never feel the same. I just needed you to know." She didn't kiss him. She didn't pull away either. She stood there, caught between the past that still whispered, and a future that dared her to want more. "Maybe," she said softly, "we met at the wrong time." But her eyes told a different story, one filled with longing, conflict, and a flicker of something dangerously close to love. And just like that, the line between right and real began to blur. The days after that night were quieter, but not in the way they used to be. There was no awkwardness between Eliza and Jacob, just a heavy, unspoken awareness. Every glance was weighted, every word chosen carefully, like one wrong sentence could tip the balance they were both trying to hold on to. Eliza tried to stay focused. She filled her days with long walks, scribbling in her journal, wandering through bookshops, pretending she wasn't waiting to hear his footsteps coming through the door. Jacob buried himself in rehearsals, returning late, exhausted but always with a soft smile reserved only for her. It was a delicate dance, Two people circling something they couldn't name but felt with every breath. Then came the night of the storm. Rain lashed the windows. Wind howled through Vienna's ancient streets, and the city curled into itself like a secret. The lights flickered. Eliza was sitting on the sofa wrapped in a blanket when Jacob walked in. Wet hair, flushed cheeks, violin case slung over his shoulder. "Power's cutting in and out," he said, setting down his things. She nodded. "It's the kind of night you remember years from now." He looked at her then. Really looked. And something shifted in the room. He sat beside her, closer than usual, not touching, but near enough for the warmth between them to rise. The thunder rolled. "Sometimes I think I'm crazy for feeling this way," he murmured. "But when I'm near you, everything feels honest." Eliza's heart thudded. "We've both been lonely for a long time," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Maybe we're just holding on to the nearest light." He turned toward her, expression tender but intense. "Or maybe we found something real in the dark." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick with choices. She could step away, reinforce the line that still stood between them. But instead, Eliza closed her eyes, inhaled slowly, and asked the question she'd been afraid of. "What if this isn't just loneliness?" Jacob's response was a whisper. "Then it's the most dangerous truth I've ever felt." That night, they didn't cross any lines. There were no kisses, no confessions beyond what had already been said. But something between them changed. The next morning, she woke to find fresh flowers on the table and a note that read, "For every day you've stayed, I've felt less lost. Thank you." She touched the paper gently, heart aching in the sweetest way. But guilt returned, sharp and familiar. In town, she wandered into a chapel, sat alone, and let the quiet swallow her. Was this wrong? She had loved Mark, truly, and Jacob was his son. But life wasn't a clean line. It curved, cracked, and broke open in ways no one expected. Maybe love wasn't about rules. Maybe it was about timing, and choices, and honesty. Back at the apartment, Jacob was playing music. Something new, something soft. She listened from the hallway, not ready to go in. He stopped playing when he sensed her presence. "I thought about leaving," he said, not turning around. "If that's what you needed to feel at peace." Her breath caught. "Do you want to leave?" He stood slowly, facing her, eyes unreadable. "I want to stay, but only if staying doesn't hurt you." Eliza stepped forward, closing the distance between them by inches. "It already hurts, but not because of you." She paused. "Because I don't know how to stop feeling this." For the first time, neither of them looked away. And in that moment, the storm inside them grew louder than the one outside. The days that followed weren't perfect, but they were real, filled with quiet honesty, stolen glances, and the weight of decision still hanging between them. Eliza and Jacob didn't talk about what they were, not yet, but everything about them had changed. There was no denying the electricity that sparked when their hands brushed, or how her breath hitched when he laughed too freely, or how he looked at her like she was the safest place he'd ever known. But with every moment of closeness came the echo of everything they weren't supposed to be. One evening, while folding laundry, Eliza caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, older, wiser, weathered by loss. What was she doing, really? Falling. In love with a man nearly half her age? A man tied to her late husband? The guilt came in waves, but right behind it came something stronger. Truth. Jacob wasn't a boy. He wasn't looking to replace something he never had. He saw her. Not as a stand-in, not as a mistake, but as a woman who had carried pain and still chose to wake up every day. That kind of love wasn't reckless. It was brave. That night, Jacob found her in the kitchen, eyes distant, her hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. No fanfare, no games. Just raw, undeniable truth. Eliza looked up, stunned. Not because she hadn't felt it, but because hearing it made everything real. "Jacob," she began, voice shaking. But he stepped closer. "You don't have to say it back. I just need you to know. Whatever we are, whatever we become, I'm not ashamed of it. And I'll never let you feel like you should be." She stared at him, heart thudding like it hadn't in years. He meant every word. He wasn't running from anything. He was choosing her, carefully, honestly. And with that, all her doubts cracked open into something softer. "Then let's stop running," she whispered. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, and for the first time, she let herself lean in. The kiss wasn't wild or rushed. It was slow, aching, filled with months of unspoken longing and every silent moment that had passed between them. When they pulled away, there were no fireworks, just the quiet certainty of something deeply right. They spent the next few weeks not defining things, not explaining them. They simply lived. They shared meals, walked hand in hand through quiet Vienna streets, listened to music curled up on the sofa. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was grounded, flawed, and deeply human. And when Eliza finally called Mark's sister to share the truth, carefully, respectfully, she expected fury. But instead, she heard a long pause, then soft understanding. "You were always the one who held him together," the woman said gently. "Maybe now you get to be held too." That night, Eliza sat beside Jacob at the piano as he played something new, something he'd written just for her. No title. No lyrics. Just emotion, layered in sound. And as the final note lingered in the air, she looked at him and said the words she'd feared for so long. "I love you, Jacob. Not because you needed me. Not because I was lonely. But because somehow, when everything was falling apart, you walked in and gave me a reason to believe again." He smiled, eyes full of warmth. "Then we've both been saved." Outside, the city shimmered beneath a quiet sky. Inside, two souls, once broken, finally found peace in each other. Not because they were supposed to, but because they dared to.